Hey there, DC peeps. Isn't it strange how, right after my book comes out, Rebooted, The Many Deaths of DC, that Tatiana Siegel announces she's doing a very similar book? Yeah, this is strange, and, well, I guess we're gonna get into it right now. So, here over at Variety, here's the headline. Variety executive editor Tatiana Siegel writing sweeping history of the DC film franchise with Crown taking worldwide rights to upcoming book written by William Earl. That's a good name, William. Crown Publishing has acquired worldwide rights to an upcoming book by Tatiana Siegel, Variety's executive editor of film and media that covers the sweeping history of the DC film franchise. The book will offer a complete behind-the-scenes story, one of the most storied, dramatic, and successful superhero franchises in Hollywood history, from George Reeves to David Corenswet. So I just want to point out, my book is 100 years of history. It goes all the way back to the original Siegel and Schuster comic books, the Great Depression, them in high school, things of that nature. I cover George Reeves, and I do touch on the DCU. And the first draft of my book was done a year ago, and it came out before she announced hers. She's extensively covered both the business of the DC and Marvel franchises from, it's just saying that she covers drama, which is funny because in my book, she specifically name-dropped in like 3 chapters, having covered up abuse and scandals and things that have gone on and lied about people and become a mouthpiece for Warner Brothers. In fact, I chronicle her journey from where she was in the Penske Media Company to where during the Me Too movement, she suddenly shifts dramatically. And in fact, other people within the industry said that it was not business as usual for the company. And many of them said that it was because she didn't like that she was having to basically hold predators accountable. So in like the very first chapter of the book, Batman v Superfan, she shows up only a few paragraphs in where she starts lying about the number of bots, starts talking about things she's doing and starts making all these attacks. I point out that she compared Zack Snyder's Wonder Woman to, and this is a real quote, an ISIS jihadi. But I just thought this was a fascinating thing that Tatiana, who has a storied history of being a mouthpiece and attack dog for Warner Brothers, along with Humberto Gonzalez, who both seem to be pretty comfortable with fabricating information, announces a book called Gods and Monsters, mirroring the first chapter of the DCU's terminology, right after my book goes live. It's potentially just strange coincidence, maybe like the Super Slash Man movie with Christopher Reeve. They're just trying to drum up nostalgia for the past or besmirch the past so that you think that by comparison, anything that comes out next is good. So I just thought it was interesting. And you know what? Why don't I read you a little something from the book? So for context, this is one of the early chapters, Batman v Superfan. And this is a few pages into that one. I've already covered Humberto Gonzalez's initial claims about the Oscars votes, his history in journalism, and talked about Casey Bloys, who was exposed for using fake accounts to argue with people in favor of Warner Brothers being amazing, HBO Max being amazing, and real fans having never eaten better. He also did not lose his job for that, by the way, which has now dovetailed into the part of the chapter about Tatiana Siegel, who was also part of those bot conversations. So that's the context. Let's get going. About a year ago, Siegel penned an article for Variety about Warner Brothers' soon-to-be ending copyright hold on DC characters, in which she compared Zack Snyder's Wonder Woman to an ISIS jihadi, which is both insanely out of pocket and pretty racist, to be honest. This was an attempt to form an angry mob against Snyder who would be so blinded with rage that they'd extend the control corporations have over copyright and characters. That's called fear-mongering, and it's unprofessional as hell. Keep your head on a swivel, because Tatiana played a role in the Ray Fisher versus Warner Media topics discussed in Truth, Justice, and the American Way. That's a chapter later on in the book. I think arguably one of the best I've ever written. It isn't the first controversy within Warner Bros. She's been connected with, nor is it the last. So who exactly is this controversial media pundit? Tatiana Siegel is a reporter that has worked within the Penske Media Corp umbrella for some time now. She made waves in January of 2022 when she became the center of a journalistic controversy, which was covered by journalist Aaron Gell in his write-up for the Los Angeles Magazine. Gell's article, titled "The Woman at the Center of Hollywood's Latest Trade War," claimed that the shakeup saw Siegel pinball her way through the Penske Media Corp's journalistic branches in a rather bizarre turn of events. Stranger still is the alleged reason it happened. According to industry insiders like Janice Min, the position change was insanity and not at all business as usual within the Penske Media's companies. Insiders allege that her change in workplace position was due to a falling out about how to cover Justice League, Rebel Moon, and piano lesson actor Ray Fisher's claims about Joss Whedon. This was rumored to be the culmination of disagreements stemming back to the coverage of Warner Brothers' former CEO, Kevin Tsujihara, who allegedly sexually propositioned actress Charlotte Kirk in exchange for potential movie roles. You may recall how Kirk was allegedly offered as a sexual gift to close a deal between Brett Ratner's Rat Pack company and Warner Brothers. Tatiana Siegel didn't care for the condemnation angle against the sexual exploitation of women. This is rumored to have led to her career shakeup. On July 18, 2022, Siegel released her article entitled Exclusive: Fake Accounts Fueled the Snyder Cut Online Army, where she pushed much of the same narrative that Gonzalez had. She began her hit piece by claiming that Zack Snyder had tried to have Geoff Johns' name removed from Zack Snyder's Justice League release. This seems unlikely, as Johns is still listed in the credits of the film, and nobody outside of her unnamed source has ever made such an allegation. Siegel offered an alleged Snyder quote saying, "Jeff and John are dragging their feet on taking their names off of my cut. Now I will destroy them on social media," which has all of the believability of Henry Cavill's CGI upper lip. Even people who despise Zack Snyder's depictions of DC's pantheon should smell the stink on that one. Not only does this not fit the public persona we know, it isn't worded in the way that Zack Snyder speaks. Snyder, like myself, is dyslexic, and his way of talking is very distinct. If the claim was that Snyder had quoted Joseph Campbell or some Greek play on describing Geoff Johns' utterly archaic lack of talent, I would give it more credence. Not much, mind you, but some. Despite the lack of a named source or the absurdity of the claims, the internet still took to quoting Siegel's article listed above that Snyder was, quote, like a Lex Luthor wreaking havoc during post-production on Zack Snyder's Justice League. The man was in post-production on a 4-hour movie honoring his dead child and Army of the Dead amidst a pandemic. I don't think he had time to bother DC has-beens amidst that workload. You can add that to the list of dubious claims Tatiana has made. Siegel also claimed that cybersecurity firm Q5ID had done research on the Snyder hashtag and came to the conclusion that, quote, there is no question that bots were involved, end quote. In Siegel's article, former Q5ID CTO Becky Wanta is quoted saying the following: "There are certain patterns that bots give off that we saw here. They arrive at almost the same time in huge numbers. Sometimes they can be traced to unusual servers in remote countries, and their content will be precisely similar." First of all, this isn't in the book. Precisely and similar are not the same thing. Similar is vague. Precisely is, well, it's precision, it's exact. So, Becky, you might want to choose better words next time. This, again, omits the trending day and seems to infer that any accounts from a country other than the United States is an inorganic user. It also doesn't provide data set information on how many accounts were analyzed, what the criteria for bot-like behavior was in the study, or how long the study was conducted, or how they verified their hypothesis on these accounts. Even a freshman in college would need a better documentation than this. The lack of specifics is not only concerning, but the company's implications come across as racist. What is a remote country? Why can't fans in countries other than the United States be considered valuable customers? Does Warner Brothers not want their money? If not, then why is Max available there, and why do they release movies in international theaters? Adding suspicion to Becky's claim is that it is incredibly difficult not to flag an account as spam when they're tweeting the same hashtags 10 times a day for a month or even years in the case of Snyder fans. Fans who regularly showed up for a movie and were hyper-focused in the name of competition leading up to the Oscars would of course appear more spam-prone than usual. That doesn't mean that these people aren't real or that their interests in Warner Brothers products hold lesser value. Of course, the college students, construction workers, parents, actors, and teachers who tweeted about Zack Snyder's Justice League repeatedly for weeks, months, or years in coordinated campaigns could set off false warnings in a data sector that analysts are still struggling to sort out. This isn't compelling data. In fact, it isn't data at all. It's just a claim we're supposed to accept from someone we've never heard of. Attempts to directly reach out to Becky Wanta for further details on her team's research parameters were unsuccessful. While it is likely that some degree of bot activity exists in every online fandom, the word usage in Siegel's article attempts to paint Snyder fans as some extreme case of false flag users. Likewise, Siegel seems to use the comments of Avnish Chandra, a data analyst for Graphica, on Warner Brothers accounts with Snyder-centric replies as proof of unprecedented bot behavior. This is very ironic, given that Warner Brothers was secretly running fake accounts to defend their company from genuine user feedback in the same reply sections Siegel claims were being studied. I wonder why they didn't notice that in their research. I personally know some of the people who Siegel is trying to paint as a bot army and know both their faces and personal stories. They've shared their fan art, and we've even had repeated contact outside of Twitter. Some of them were researchers or helped write early drafts of these very chapters. Hell, one key individual that was alleged to be a bot was featured by Warner Brothers in their first fandom online event. They know she's real, so why are they pretending she isn't? The point of real fans showing support for yet unmade movies under Warner Brothers' social media posts about House of the Dragon was to put the message front and center wherever Warner Brothers went. It was not a spam campaign run by ones and zeros. It was an attempt to ensure that Warner Brothers could not ignore fan demand, regardless of whether it ever resulted in a movie or not. This was no different than when Paramount fans campaigned to give Anson Mount's Enterprise crew their own show, when the Expanse fans rallied to keep the Rocinante flying, or how Firefly fans have spent decades demanding Fox Studios to continue the story of Firefly. Siegel wrapped her article up with an implication that whether or not there were bots, the possibility that there were was reason enough to push back against any and all Snyder fandom adjacent activity. I suppose you could say that if there was even a 1% chance, she had to take it as an absolute certainty. I wonder if she sees the irony in that. Here's a quote. "That's my concern with the manipulation that's happening inside these movements, relative to bots. You can drive the court of public opinion. It needs to be dealt with because it's going to get worse before it gets better." Well, sister, you were right about that, but, you're the part that's making it worse. This is, of course, a laughable claim, as Siegel has seemingly reported falsely to sway public opinion on multiple occasions herself. You shouldn't just take my word for it. I'm a nobody. Listen to CNN spokesperson Risa Heller, who referred to Siegel's reporting practices as patently and aggressively false, while Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic characterized Siegel's journalistic stylings as, quote, "based on false assumptions and false information. She provides no evidence to support her claims and characterizations," end quote. Even outside of the superhero movie sphere of influence, Siegel's practices are known more for scathing innuendo than verifiable truths. In fact, her work is so controversial that CNN's Oliver Darcy had the following to say. When publishing a high-wire piece the length of Siegel's, it's almost a certainty that someone will contest a detail or two, but it is extraordinary to see the volume of blowback with this degree of contention, and it's rare to see on-the-record criticism from top industry voices speaking in such plain terms. Siegel claims to have accessed internal Warner Bros. Reports meant to examine how real the Snyder Legion footprint online truly was. I actually think that Snyder Legion has a catchy ring to it, to be honest, and I think Siegel should use that in her next hit piece for a little variety. Cult is so 8 years ago. According to Siegel, the reports showed that roughly 87% of Snyder-centric Twitter accounts were in fact real, verifiable people. Siegel claimed that a potential 13% bot following meant that Zack Snyder wasn't worth listening to or indulging on a Hollywood scale. That's rich, given that a fan audit done in 2022, the same week of Siegel's article, showed that Tatiana Siegel herself had a 19.9% fake follower account. That puts her at least 1.4% over the threshold for accounts of her size and 3.9% over the threshold she herself claimed made DC fans who liked Snyder invalid. Glass houses and thrown stones and all that jazz. These claims were so preposterous that even Forbes started picking them apart. On July 19th, 2022, Paul Tassi wrote the article, "Warner Brothers' claims about a bot-infested Snyder Cut movement don't really add up." And I have to say, I agree. But of course I do. I'm biased. Luckily, Paul Tassi is also biased, as he doesn't much like Snyder or his fans. He's argued with and blocked plenty of them in the past. He's also very much a fan of James Gunn, the Twitter-elected antithesis to Snyder's time at DC. So if Tassi thinks the Snyder blame game has gotten out of control, then there's probably something to it. In the article, Tassi noted that the estimated 87% real organic Snyder fans is a pretty significant accomplishment. Tassi goes on to cite Siegel's claims that Snyder was a Lex Luthor type, sounding pretty far-fetched, even though he himself dislikes Snyder fans, so confirmation bias would entice him to perpetuate that narrative regardless of its validity. That's the most important thing that Tassi does. It's also what journalism professors need to hammer home more often. Tassi doesn't let his personal opinions blind him to the truth. Paul says, "It's disingenuous to think that the Snyder Cut was released for any other reason besides Warner Brothers thinking it could earn them revenue and subscribers." Once again, Paul Tassi absolutely nails it. Warner Brothers could have ignored Zack Snyder's fans and muted any account or replies with those hashtags in it. They've certainly adopted a similar tactic for any hopes of Zack Snyder's Justice League 2 or 3. What Warner Brothers did instead was chase a potential streaming juggernaut for a fledgling service that needed to make waves and be talked about as much as possible. For a relatively low cost, they could get a big-ticket item on their new service during COVID where filming new content was almost impossible. Tassie accurately calls the smear campaign on its flimsy premise and points to the reason any studio funds a project. They expect that it will make them money. The backfire in Warner Brothers' plan was that upon release, Zack Snyder's movie was well regarded by critics and fans alike. During its first month on HBO Max, Zack Snyder's Justice League stood as the highest rated DC movie since Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. It wasn't the divisive mess that Warner Brothers had claimed it would be for all of those years, and every executive who had favored a $70 million reshoot by Joss Whedon now looked like a fool who had wasted studio money and hurt the DCEU's early momentum. Even the media pundits who claimed that the studio and Joss had saved DC were exposed for having bet on the wrong horse. That may seem insignificant until you realize that Zack Snyder's Justice League, like the 2017 film before it, released on the cusp of another Warner Brothers merger, this time with Discovery. The firings over financial failures that haunted the studio years prior were once again knocking on Warner Brothers' water tower. Tatiana's article attempted to paint Warner Brothers, a multi-billion-dollar company, as a victim to online hashtags offering to give the company money in exchange for releasing a movie that the studio had already paid to make. The company wasn't duped by a server farm, and they weren't the victims of anything beyond their own avarice. They made a well-liked movie for a real audience that made them a lot of money, raised stock prices for Warner Brothers to a record high of $77.27 per share. For context, Warner Brothers Discovery stock was valued at $10.08 the week that Henry Cavill was publicly ousted from the role of Superman, and as of August of this year, the company was trading for $6.64 per share. On top of rave reviews and rising stock values, the Snyder Cut helped make their streaming service a household name. That was until Warner Brothers changed HBO Max to just Max years later. I'm sure Sean Parker was thrilled. So, that's a snippet of my book, Rebooted, The Many Deaths of DC, which I will have a link to down below, where you can get a book that Warner Brothers didn't have any input on and didn't pay me to write. They can't use it as a PR spin machine like they did when they needed to announce a fake Frosty the Snowman movie to hide, all the issues that were coming up with Ray Fisher exposing them. Oh, wait, who was covering that? Oh, wait, that's right. People like Tatiana Siegel were part of that smear campaign. They did that. Oh, I'm sure she'll be totally honest with her book, though. Anyway, the ebook is already out. The physical book is coming out soon. Between now and Christmas, book 2 about comic canon and continuities will be coming out. I've got some great quotes from Frank Miller and James Gunn involved in that one, Zack Snyder, Grant Morrison, the like. Even going back to like the original people who did Superman and Batman back in the day, and people who did them within the last 30 years, people who did like Death of Superman and things like that. Book 2 even will cover the fact that the Death of Superman authors were like sent death threats and chased out of like shopping malls by angry fans and like out of book signings, and like there were newspaper areas that were taking out like little parts of the spread where instead of work needed, come apply at this construction site, it was, you killed Superman, you deserve to die, because that was how they tweeted back then. So we get into a lot of the nitty gritty there, but book 3 is way more about like the fandom stuff, the people who pose as one fandom to do horrible things, the things that were exposed, the things that no one talks about. I mean, I talk about it on this channel, but way more depth in a book than you can get in a 10 to 20 minute YouTube video. So yeah, the physical copy should be available within the next couple of days. By the time this comes up, probably within 2 to 3 days, I would hope, depending on shipping. I'm just waiting on the proof copy to make sure that the images were formatted in a way that the text is readable in them, and the screenshots that I have in the book, and making sure that the cover is fixed the way that I liked it. If you recall in the last video, I'm pretty sure I mentioned that the barcode had actually cut off part of the text on the back of the book. It's one of those things, you only see it in one of the 5 preview windows when you're going to the printer. So, I believe in making physical media available, even though I make less off of physical, because, they charge roughly the same, if not more, but at the same time, they're taking printing costs out of that fee. So I make less, but I believe that Warner Brothers is known for trying to shut down media that calls them out. So I don't know how long certain things will be hosted on different platforms, if they'll try and pull some shenanigans on it. So I want you guys to be able to order this and have it physically to yourselves in your room, on your shelf, and no one can steal it. The truth won't ever be taken from you. But yeah, Book 1, Rebooted, The Many Deaths of DC, covering 100 years of Warner Brothers and DC history, the highs and the lows, exposing the corruption, the smear campaigns, the scandals, the cover-ups. It's out now, and I didn't need Warner Brothers to give me approval on anything. And to all the people who helped me on it, all the researchers and the editors who chimed in along the way, who helped, verify articles, who did follow-up research on other journalists who looked into things, who don't want to be named because they're so scared of the threats that they've already received, which is half the reason they agreed to help in the first place, was to help change that system of abuse and toxicity. I appreciate you. I know you're watching this. I appreciate you. And what you guys helped start, I've carried to the finish line, and everyone's going to see the truth now. So thank you so much for watching. Tatiana Siegel, you have a wonderful day. Best of luck on your book, Gods and Monsters, coincidentally named after DC's new brand relaunch. And coinciding with their release, too bad my book beat yours to the presses. Too bad mine exposes you for being someone who is basically an attack dog for the studio. Don't worry, I'm sure that it won't affect your standing. Not because I don't have hard-hitting journalistic facts that are verified with dates and numbers and people you can call up and email and ask for confirmation on everything I say, because I do have all of that, but because no one trusts her to begin with, so it can't get any worse. Have a blessed day.